Hello and welcome to our channel, Cheating Exposed. Today, we're revealing another story to uncover the truth behind the lies. So, let's get started. Me, a male, 32, wife, female, 28. I have been with my wife for 7 years. At first, it was great. She was my soulmate, and I was hers. We had similar interests in sports, entertainment, social issues, more on that later, holiday destinations, and more. We were happy for years. However, things started to change when my wife became more distant, even slightly colder. Let me give you some insight. We had been together for 7 years. For 5 years, it was, as I said, happy. I felt like I was her world, just as she was mine. We went out with friends, and I would often catch her smiling at me when we were talking to others. She would take care of me when I was sick, just as I did for her. She always had my back whenever I needed her. She was my rock. My best friend. My one and only. We did many things together, like hiking, camping, visiting wildlife resorts. We shared the same interests, and going to football games. We had a passion for each other, and I never wanted her to change. When I first met her, she was beautiful, brunette curly hair, a stunning smile, and such a nice personality. She always implied she felt the same about me. She made me feel special. Not once did I feel inadequate or insecure about myself, more on that later. As I said, for over 5 years, everything was great. But things started to change when her new supervisor started at her work. I'll call him Marjus, 30. At first, she came home and talked about Marjus. She would say he's funny and makes people feel good. Of course, I was slightly taken aback because she would usually come home and ask about my day before talking about hers. But this time, she immediately started talking about Marjus. At the time, I brushed it off. He was new at her work, and since she'd been seeing the same faces for years, I figured his arrival felt refreshing to her. Weeks passed, and my wife started to seem more distant and secretive. She began attending more work nights out, which didn't initially bother me since she'd gone to plenty before. However, one night stood out. We were meant to go to a mutual friend's house for drinks. Our friend, Daniel, 32, was in a bad way, as he'd been diagnosed with a severe disease. My wife, as I said, is usually a rock, empathetic and supportive. So when we found out about Daniel's diagnosis, we didn't hesitate to plan a visit to show our support. The night came, but my wife was running late from a work outing. I called her a few times, no answer. I texted her, still no reply. After waiting, I decided to go to Daniel's house by myself. Daniel and I talked about how he's adapting and coping. During that time, I felt for Daniel. Such a nice guy to have this happen to him, it's cruel. Afterward, I got home, and I was seething. My wife was still not home. No missed calls or texts. Seriously? I couldn't believe it. I started to worry that she might have been in an accident, so I called her work colleague Jane, 28. I get along with Jane and asked if Kelly, my wife, was out with her. Jane said that Kelly was out, but Jane had gone home, leaving just Kelly and Marjus still out. I was furious. We'd known Daniel for years, and she would skip meeting our friend over a guy she just met. I kept telling myself there must be an explanation for this. I waited until she got home. Eventually, she arrived and saw me in the living room, staring at her. "What's wrong?" "Everything okay?" she asked. I looked at her in disbelief and said, "Daniel." She looked mortified. "I'm sorry, I forgot. I was out with work friends and lost track of time." She looked sincere. She and Daniel were good friends, so maybe she really did forget. I asked her, "Who was out with you?" She replied, "The usual, Jane, Sophie, 30, etc. I followed up, "Not Marjus?" "Oh, yes, he was there," she said. I pressed on, remembering what Jane had told me. "Did everyone stay out until the end?" She replied, "Yes, it was a good night." The next day, I was still angry. I didn't say anything to my wife, but I couldn't shake the thought. She had never lied to me before, and she had never let anyone down. I couldn't grasp that she would bail on our sick friend for a guy she just met. Over the next few days, my wife became more distant. She came home later and wasn't affectionate toward me. I chalked it up to her workload at first. But when she got home, she was constantly on her phone. I asked her, "Who is it that you're always texting?" "Just a friend from work," she replied. "Is it Marjus?" I asked. "No," she said, "but what's the problem if it is?" I had never seen my wife get defensive like this before, but I decided to be honest. I replied, "Because you never shut up about him. He's been working with you for under a month, and you seem to idolize him. Your face sparkles when you talk about him. So much so, you forgot about Daniel." I could tell I'd hit a nerve. She snapped back, "No, I do not idolize Marjus. He's nice, but just a friend. And I already apologized to Daniel." That wasn't enough for me. Later that night, while she was asleep, I checked her phone. And, surprise, it was full of intimate messages between them. I took photos of the conversation for later. A week had passed, and the pattern continued: the late nights, the lack of affection. I confided in a friend about my concerns, and he told me I might be overthinking. "Maybe you're just being paranoid," he said. "Why don't you try doing something thoughtful, like surprising her with dinner?" I liked the idea. I texted my wife and asked, "Are you busy after work?" She replied, "No, I'm free." It seemed like a nice conversation, and I felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. So, I prepared dinner, bought a nice bottle of wine, and even picked up flowers. When she got home, I greeted her with excitement, but she looked at me sadly. "I'm really sorry," she said, "but a friend from work is organizing a surprise birthday party for a colleague, and tonight's the only night they can do it." I shook my head in frustration and anger. She left almost immediately, driving off without even acknowledging the effort I'd put into the evening. That was it. After months of suspicion, I needed proof. I know you might be thinking, "Can't you see the signs?" Trust me, I saw them. But I was hoping I was wrong. Hoping it was all in my head. The truth is, I was scared to face the reality. But I had to. I needed the truth. I did something I'm not proud of. I put a tracker in her car. That evening, I pretended to work late so she wouldn't see me when she got home. I watched from a distance as she arrived, then left again in her car shortly after. I followed her as she drove further out of town, eventually pulling into a secluded car park. She waited there until another car pulled up beside hers. It was him, Marjus. She got out of her car and climbed into his. It was clear what was happening. I recorded her getting into his car as evidence. Over the next few days, she acted as if everything was fine. She didn't realize I knew. She smiled at me, held my hand at breakfast, and behaved like the wife I'd known for years. One day, while she was at work, I had a day off and decided to snoop on her laptop. I searched for anything suspicious, but found nothing. Then, as I checked her drawers, I discovered an iPad hidden at the bottom. It wasn't mine, so I assumed she'd bought it. To my surprise, it didn't require a password. I opened it and started searching. At first, there were no text conversations, but then I stumbled upon a folder. Inside were photos, explicit pictures of my wife in sexual poses, clearly meant for him. There were countless photos, but worse, there were videos. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The videos were graphic. I saw Marjus with my wife, and she seemed to enjoy every second of it. But that wasn't the worst part. There were also videos of my wife with another woman and another man, with Marjus involved. The other man made me sick to my core. He was someone I recognized, a vile bigot with tattoos displaying hateful symbols. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, who had always stood against bigotry, was with a man who aligned himself with these disgusting views. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the hypocrisy. How could the woman who shared my values, who detested hate and injustice, willingly be complicit in this? What did she see in him? I felt like I didn't even know the person I'd been married to anymore. Throughout our marriage, my wife and I talked about fantasies, but we never acted on them. Like many men, I joked about a threesome or other ideas, but my wife always said, I'd never do that. I could never be with another woman or do anything that makes me uncomfortable. I respected her boundaries without question. It didn't bother me, I loved her deeply. That's why seeing her in those videos, doing things she swore she'd never do, and with people like him, hurt me in ways I can't describe. It wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal on a deeper level. I watched all the videos. I know, I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop myself. Every clip was like a dagger to my chest. I copied the videos and photos to my laptop as evidence. At this point, I wasn't looking for explanations or closure. I just wanted her out of my life. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, why? Why would she do this? Why was she willing to explore things with him that she refused with me? What made him so special? And how could she be with someone whose values she once despised? Feeling overwhelmed, I turned to my closest friend, Daniel. He's the kind of man you can trust with anything, a good heart and a sharp mind. When I told him everything, he was horrified. He couldn't believe this was the same woman he'd known for years. She's gone too far, he said. You've got more than enough proof. Confronting her or him won't change anything. She's already made her choice. Daniel was right. He reminded me that I deserved better, that I needed a fresh start and someone genuine, not the illusion I thought I'd married. Hearing that gave me a sense of control for the first time in months. I realized I'd been too afraid to confront her earlier because I wasn't ready for the truth. Deep down, I didn't know if I wanted to save the marriage or end it. But after seeing the photos, videos, and lies, I knew exactly what I had to do. The next day, I went to see a lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. While I waited for the paperwork, life at home continued as if nothing had happened. She acted normal, always glued to her phone, always out late. I didn't care anymore. My focus was on moving forward. 3 weeks later, the papers were ready. I'd made up my mind to move out. We rented our place, and the lease was up in 3 months. I was prepared to pay my share until then, but I couldn't stay a moment longer. The day I left, I waited for her to leave for work. I told her I was covering a shift later in the day. She barely reacted, just shrugged and said, "Okay." No goodbye hug. No kiss. Not that I expected it, those had stopped months ago. As soon as she was gone, I packed my essentials. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, along with my wedding ring. It felt final. I moved in with an old friend from university, Adam, who lived in another city. I couldn't have been more grateful, not just for his support, but for the distance it gave me from her, from the city, from the life we'd built together. I told my parents everything, well, not every sordid detail. They were shocked but understanding. They supported my decision, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. I don't know how my wife reacted when she saw the papers. To be honest, I don't care. It's clear she wants Marjus, and that's fine by me. I just hope the divorce goes through quickly. All I want now is to rebuild my life and find peace. Later that night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, calls, texts, one after another. It was my wife. I didn't expect this. Honestly, I thought she wanted this too, that we were both ready to move on. But I couldn't have been more wrong. I didn't answer. I had no interest in hearing what she had to say. I glanced at the messages out of curiosity. They were all the same, "I'm sorry." "I love you." "Please, can we talk?" Over and over, for hours. Eventually, I blocked her number. I deleted all my social media accounts to avoid any chance of her reaching out. I needed space. The next day, I spoke to my lawyer about the divorce papers, only to find out she hadn't signed them yet. Then came the emails. I left that channel open because I wanted to keep some line of communication, strictly to finalize the divorce. But her emails were no different from her texts, apologies, pleas to talk, declarations of love. Finally, I replied. My response was short, no. All I want is the divorce. Her reply came quickly. She said she didn't want a divorce, that I was the only man she loved, and that Marjus meant nothing to her. It's almost funny, because I never told her why I left. But she knew. Her guilt was written all over her words. And seeing her plead for forgiveness, knowing she was the one hurting now, was oddly satisfying. I confided in Adam about everything. He's been my rock through all this, offering me a place to stay and the space to figure things out. When I told him about the emails, he said something I wasn't ready to hear: you'll have to meet her eventually. You left without answers. No matter how much you try to avoid it, you'll need to hear them someday. I disagreed immediately. Why should I talk to her? She didn't care about my feelings for months. She didn't care about me when she was sneaking around with Marjus. So why should I care now? But deep down, I knew he was right. I've been angry, angrier than I've ever been. And now, seeing her try to reconcile has left me more confused than ever. I truly believed she'd just sign the papers and move on with him. Instead, she's asking to meet, and I don't know how to handle it. My therapist has been a lifeline through all this. In our last session, I told her everything: the affair, the photos, the videos, and now, the emails. I also mentioned my wife's request to meet. She didn't sugarcoat her response. When you left without explaining why, deep down, part of you wanted her to plead. You wanted her to feel the same pain she caused you. You tell yourself she wouldn't care, but you wanted her to care. However, meeting her means giving up some of the control you feel you have now. Her words hit hard because they were true. She added, if you decide to meet, ask the hard questions, even if the answers hurt. You're not moving on, you're running away because you're scared the last 7 years were a lie. That session stayed with me. Now, 2 days later, my wife is still asking to meet, and she's made it clear that she won't sign the papers without it. I've talked to my parents and friends about it. My dad thinks I could legally force her to sign, but it might take months. He said if there's even a small chance she'll sign after talking, it's worth it. Adam agreed. So, I've decided to meet her. To say I'm nervous would be an understatement. I don't know what to expect or how I'll feel when I see her. Should I go unguarded or be open to whatever she says? Should I push for answers or stay focused on getting the paper signed? Right now, I'm just hoping for clarity. If anyone has advice on how to handle this, I'd be grateful. The final update. This will be my final post, but I want to address some of the questions many of you had. As you know, I decided to reconcile with my wife, a decision I do not regret. I understand if that upsets some of you, but ultimately, it was my choice to make. My wife and I are still together. She continues to see her psychologist, though I am no longer involved in consultation sessions with her or her mother. This isn't because my wife wanted it that way, but rather because her therapy is in its latter stages. It's essentially nearing the conclusion, with only her final closure sessions left to go. One of the recurring questions I've received is about Marjus. In my earlier posts, I mentioned that he disappeared after the affair came to light. However, I later discovered that wasn't entirely true. He did, in fact, try to meet my wife during the time she was working to reconcile with me. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, let me explain exactly what happened. After the affair blew up, Marjus initially went off the grid, but he didn't stay silent for long. He repeatedly tried to contact my wife through calls, texts, FaceTime, and even by showing up at our house. My wife blocked him on all platforms, which seemed to work for a while. This was during the period when she was focused on repairing her relationship with me and her family. Then one day, my wife received a call from an unknown number. It was Marjus. At the time, she was with her mom, sister, and some of her mom's friends. When everyone realized it was him, my wife put the call on speakerphone. She didn't leave the room or try to hide it. She wanted the conversation to happen in front of witnesses. I won't bore you with all the details, but the gist of the conversation was Marjus begging to meet her. At first glance, it might seem questionable that my wife agreed, but there's more to the story. Her psychologist had advised her that if he ever tried to contact her, she should take the call in front of others for both support and accountability. The reason my wife agreed to meet him wasn't for closure in a romantic sense, but to end that chapter of her life once and for all. She wanted to confront him in person and make it absolutely clear that she was done with him. She chose the time and place, the Fountain Park, a public area with lots of people around. For additional support, she asked her friend Bree and Bree's boyfriend, Tor, to accompany her. They stayed close by to ensure nothing went wrong. For context, Tor is a tall, imposing guy, a classic Swedish 6 feet 4 inches Adolf Lundgren type, and was there solely to protect her if needed. Some of you might wonder why my wife didn't tell me about this meeting at the time. The reason, according to her and her mother, was that they didn't want to risk jeopardizing our reconciliation. They believed this was a personal step my wife needed to take to move forward. How do I know all this wasn't a romantic meetup? Well, my wife recorded the entire conversation, and Bree and Tor were both there as witnesses. I know and trust them. I won't go into every single detail of the meeting, though I listened to the entire recording. Here are the main excerpts. Bree and Tor are sitting on the bench next to my wife and Marjus, quietly observing the conversation. Marjus, hello. Wife, what do you want, Marjus? Marjus, okay, well, I want you to explain yourself. Wife, explain myself? Marjus, yes. Please tell me, after everything we've been through and all that I've done for you, why did you abandon us? Wife, that's easy, because I didn't love you. I never did. I'm embarrassed and ashamed that I ruined my life for you. Marjus, stop being dramatic. I gave you a life. A life your husband never gave you. Did he? Did he treat you well? No, he didn't. No one did, except me. Christ, you sound like a child right now. Wife, you never gave me anything but shame. There was never an cuss, was there? It was always about my husband and my family. Marjus, no, it was about you and me. Wife, no, it wasn't. You were obsessed with my husband and my family. You always wanted to know what my husband liked, what my family did. But the strange thing was that, from the start, you claimed they were wrong. My husband was wrong for me, my family was wrong. But the truth is, it was you who was wrong. Marjus, right, stop being childish. I don't recall you objecting to us back then. Or to the things I bought you. I remember you smiling and loving it. So just thank me. Wife, thank you. Thank you for what, exactly? For how you got enjoyment from me disrespecting my husband. For how much pleasure you took in hearing about my husband being in pain. But you didn't stop there. You made me say things to my husband and my family that would hurt them. At the time, I didn't realize it, but you always wanted a report of everything I said and did. At this point, my wife was losing her composure. Marjus laughs, am I supposed to apologize for your husband being pathetic? Because he and your family were holding you back. That's the truth. I remember how much you loved what I gave you. You smiled, embraced me. I made you realize that your circle was nothing more than a stepping stone. Now, I'm prepared to forgive you, and we can actually make a life together. Wife laughs, you're right. I did smile when I received the gifts. But I was never happy with you. You were brilliant at making me feel like you were the one. But the truth is, you're just a pathetic man. Do you really think I ended it when I saw the papers because of some kind of competition between my husband and you? No. My husband is a far better man than you. He's more than deserving of me. He's kind, genuine, and real. You, on the other hand, are vile in every way. Marjus, you're such an ungrateful woman, aren't you? Seriously, the weekends away, the restaurants, the theater, I gave you all of that. I got you to meet real people. I bettered you. I made you confident. The way you're speaking to me now is disrespectful, but you're not thinking straight. Wife, oh, I'm thinking straight now. Probably for the first time in a while. You want straight? All those things you did were superficial. I didn't see it then. But what kind of man supports white nationalism? What kind of man thinks it's his right to hit women for nothing? What kind of man tries to stop a person from attending her best friend's funeral? Wife paused to catch her breath and then continued, "You are not a man at all. Just a bully and a coward. I'm disgusted that I got involved with you. But I have to live with my mistakes. And you, Marjus, are one of them. You can threaten me with releasing the videos and pictures. I don't care. There's nothing you can do to me that I haven't already punished myself for. This will be the last time we see each other or speak. If you try to call me or contact me again, I will call the police. Take this as your final warning. Goodbye." Wife stood up to leave. Marjus tried to grab her, but Tor stepped in front of him. Marjus glanced at Tor and walked away. That was the last time she, and everyone else, saw him. I found out about this later. My wife and mother-in-law didn't want anything to jeopardize a potential reconciliation. When I heard this, my heart skipped. But after talking to Tor, Bree, and my mother-in-law, I began to understand why my wife had to meet him. The psychologist and my own therapist explained that my wife wanted to take back control. Control from him. It's clear from talking to my wife, the psychologist, and our families that she had been submissive. Marjus controlled everything around her. That meeting marked the second time my wife took control back. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is, what if another Marjus comes along? I've asked myself that 100 times. But after everything we've been through and being on the path of reconciliation, I'm not giving in. I chose this because I believe my marriage is worth saving. I know that I'll get some abuse here on Reddit, but honestly, I don't care. What I do appreciate is constructive feedback, whether it's support or disagreement. Yes, it's a risk, but it's worth it because I love her. I always have. For the first time in a long while, I feel happy again. My wife and I are doing the things we love, reconnecting with both our families. It's a journey. The last frequent question I get is, does your wife accept what she did? For my wife, it's going to be a long road ahead. She accepts full responsibility for what happened. If anyone says it was solely his fault, she will fully disagree, as she mentioned in previous updates. She still feels guilty, ashamed, and sick about it. She's still in therapy, and she's making progress, but as I've said, it's a long road, a road that my wife, our families, and I are walking together. I don't regret our reconciliation. I get that the trend on Reddit is about separating, scorched earth, vengeance, and all of that. I understand that, believe me. But after all the anger, pain, and hatred, everyone has to make a choice. Stay or leave. I chose to stay. Not because I'm a simp or a doormat, but because my marriage is worth fighting for. Well, folks, that's all. Thank you all for listening. Please like, comment, and share the video if you enjoyed it. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you will be notified when we upload the next video. Take care.